This is an introduction to British modernism, the period that begins about 1880 and extends to about 1945. So this is the next thing that we are going to take a look at in regards to our class, and it's really the unit that we're going to be in through to the end of the semester in May and June. So if you go to the basic ideas of British modernism, by definition, it is a style or movement in the arts that seeks to break from classical and traditional form. Simply, what that means is all of those ideas that existed prior to 1880, the Victorian beliefs in marriage, which many of you are writing about, the ideas about social organization, the ideas about where wealth should come from, whether it's inherited, whether it is earned as cash, those kinds of things. These are ideas that are now all going to be coming sort of to the forefront and challenged. The movement originated when writers felt that they required a new form of writing to express their ideologies and outlooks towards life. They didn't have the tools to deal with sort of the psychological upheaval caused by all these major shifts. While Victorianism struggled with these things, the modernists seemed to be more emotionally unable to deal with and cope with these challenges as they occurred. So what we see happening here is writers begin to pursue a highly individualistic form of writing. So there's not really a set of rules that we can go through and say work well for modernism. We'll have some general markers, but really we're defining a movement that seeks to defy definition. So thus this style of writing represents a radical shift in cultural sensibilities of the period, and modernism took shape in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, time periods which witnessed the rapid growth and development of modern industrial societies and the rapid growth of cities. We've touched on this in Victorianism. This is just a further continuation of the alienation sort of the psyche of the average British writer and the average British citizen. World War I and the horrors, the war that was going to end all wars, also fed the urge for a new way to express the protest towards the social atmosphere present at the time. Probably one of the larger earmarks here is that this is about social awareness, social justice. What is man's relationship to his culture? A little less about man's relationship to the larger universe, but man's connection to his own ideas. Some of the major writers we're going to look at in regards to poetry are Ezra Pound and other poets rejected and expressed a more sharp style of writing to raise their voice of protest against the existing social conditions. So I think these are really the things that we're going to be talking about. It is a social movement. It is designed specifically to bring forth all those deep-seated problems that individuals saw with themselves in relationship to the universe. That's the context for modernism. Now, if you go to some of the specific characteristics, I'm going to give you what those are so you have an ability to look for them. Maybe this will serve you in your research paper. We'll see. So the formal and stylistic characteristics of modernism, things that we look for in its presentation. We're familiar with the characteristics of Romanticism. We're familiar with what Victorianism did with its individual works. Modern works generally talk of irony, comparisons, juxtapositions, comparisons of things that don't go together so as to heighten our criticism of those ideas. So irony, comparison, juxtaposition, satire. We're very familiar with satire as a social criticism and as an engine, how that works. So these are the major types of writing that we see in British modernism. Often written in the first person, that allows us that sort of jump into the individual psyche and the thoughts that each characters are having. In modernism, the content of the writing is represented as a long stream of consciousness. So once you get into the individual character's mind, there's disconnection. There is sort of a bombardment of how those ideas come together. And you as a reader have to sort of sort them out and kind of come up with a linear pattern. So stream of consciousness by definition is a writing style that reflects the way the human mind works. And what we know from psychology is the human mind is driven by memory. Memory is driven by our five senses, and primarily our visual sense is very powerful. Our sense of smell is even more powerful than I think the other senses put together. So when we look at stream of consciousness, this is image-driven organization. So we go from one idea to another, to another, to another. So we want to keep these things in mind and make sure that we hold that central idea together. Very few, if any, of the novels this year for the research paper had stream of consciousness as a major form. But we're going to spend some time over the next 3 to 4 weeks really kind of getting into this and examining what's going on. So I want to make sure that you understand that stream of consciousness is incredibly critical to our understanding. Stream of consciousness often does not have a proper beginning, middle, and an end. It's not linear. I'll use that term several times. Hence, readers may get slightly confused as to what the writer is trying to communicate to them. Juxtaposition usually represents something which is unusual. For example, a cat and mouse sharing a good friendship. Things that don't work, and that jarring sort of clash between things that we don't expect gives us a greater insight into sort of what all of this means. So we're going to be using these techniques of irony and satire and juxtaposition to really get at the core of what we think our ideas are. Modernist writers use a lot of irony and satire as tools that aid them in making fun of something and point out its flaws. It's a major tool that we get to examine as we go through these different pieces. Thematic characteristics of modernist writing. Modernist writing for a first-time reader can be a frustrating experience, requiring a big effort to understand the concept. This is because of the fragmentation and lack of consciousness in the writing, which are main characteristics of modernism. So to slow that down, fragmentation and a lack of conciseness, not consciousness, lack of conciseness. You bounce around a lot, and there's not necessarily clear delineated connections back to what those ideas are. The plot, theme, and characters are not necessarily linear. Modernist writers usually focus more on representing the writer's ideas, opinions, and thoughts, bigger picture stuff. The details are sort of vague, and we're left to figure out that detail on our own as we go. So readers are left to do the structuring, to understand what's going on. It could be in opposition to the existing social structure that creates this sort of resistance to the status quo. It could be a social practice or a prevailing ideology that we're reacting against. It really can be anything that we're talking about. So we want to keep those things in sort of in the forefront of our brains. General characteristics of modernism. So when you look at your notes and you want to copy those things down that you're going to memorize, I've given you the general idea. So if we look at general characteristics, modernism is marked by a strong and intentional break from the traditional way of rendering a theme or thought. Modernism is marked by a strong and intentional break from the traditional way of rendering a theme or thought. No holds barred. There are no more rules about how you have to present all this. We spent the last 7.5 months talking about rules. Now we see that those rules no longer really apply. The concept of modernism denies the existence of truth. According to this school of thought, everything is relative. This is a very difficult concept to grasp. There is no definite truth. Everything is relative. It's almost like situational ethics or situational morals. Depending on the situation that you're in, different kinds of human responses are okay. That's a gray area. So modernism has this huge piece of gray area. Modernists maintain absolutely no connection with history or historical institutions. So we're not connected to norms and ideas and philosophies that we've had before. Different concepts. So we got to kind of go through and kind of shape our own understanding of what's happening. Chemistry uses the term entropy, the consistent movement towards disorder. Modernists believe, and this is like our fourth characteristic, that life is disordered. So the literature has to reflect that same sense of disorder, that same sense of entropy. This is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. There's an irony in that statement. It's not everybody's cup of tea, and I think that's really relevant. So part of modernism is how do we adjust the fact that we're imposing our ideas upon other people and trying to force those other people to see the world through our own eyes. Sort of that clash between we see ourselves as the center of the universe, which was what we've done for 8 months, and this idea that we have no place in the universe, which is sort of what modernism is really forcing us to deal with. Modernism emphasizes the importance of companionship between individuals and the celebration of inner strength. Now, this is for the last characteristic I'm going to give you right now, but I think it's important. Modernism emphasizes the importance of companionship between individuals and the celebration of inner strength. Not according to the established values of a church, of a society. It's what those two individuals find as a connection between themselves. This was very true in Hemingway, whether it's in A Farewell to Arms. Now, of course, Hemingway is an American lit text. You're going to see it in Mrs. Dalloway. You're going to see it in A Cup of Tea. You're going to see it in a lot of the different works we're going to be covering between now and then. Companionship, connection between individuals, and what gets in the way of those individuals having that companionship. So if we go through and we kind of examine these characteristics, I think we're going to have a good understanding of, at least at this point, what modernism is. Now, I will create some other files, some other supplementary files for modernism to be able to help us out. See my daughter there in the corner? Say hi, Riley. And that's it for today.